The whole town burst into cruel laughter as Jasper's world fell apart in front of everyone. His mail-order bride was supposed to be a tiny, delicate woman, but the person climbing down from that wagon was twice his size and could probably lift him over her head. While his neighbors pointed and made cruel jokes about the lonely rancher getting tricked, Jasper's heart broke into a million pieces. This good man had spent everything he had and waited 6 long months for love, only to become the town joke. Before we jump into this incredible story, smash that like button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. But what nobody knew was that this moment of crushing shame would become the most beautiful love story ever told. Jasper Thornfield's weathered hands gripped the wooden fence posts so tight his knuckles turned white as bone. The photograph in his shirt pocket felt like it was burning a hole straight through to his heart as he watched the dust settle around the wagon that had just pulled up to his gate. This wasn't right. This couldn't be right. The woman climbing down from the wagon seat was massive, not fat, but tall and broad-shouldered like a lumberjack. She stood at least 6 inches taller than his own 5'8" frame, with arms that looked like they could wrestle a bull to the ground. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her plain dress strained against shoulders that belonged on a dock worker, not a delicate bride. Behind him he heard old Pete from the general store let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," Pete muttered to his neighbor. "Looks like our bachelor got himself a real surprise package." Snickers rippled through the small crowd of townspeople who had gathered to witness Jasper's bride stepping off the afternoon stage. Heat crawled up his neck like fire ants as more whispers started. "That ain't what he ordered from that catalog, I'd bet my last dollar." Poor Jasper. Man's been waiting 6 months for a wife, and look what showed up. She could probably carry him over the threshold instead of the other way around. The woman, his supposed bride, looked directly at him with dark eyes that held a mix of defiance and something that might have been fear. Her voice, when she spoke, was deep and steady. "You Jasper Thornfield?" He couldn't find his voice. His throat felt like he'd swallowed sand. All he could do was nod while his mind raced. The photograph pressed against his chest showed a tiny slip of a woman with golden ringlets and a shy smile. Someone who looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. Someone who would make him feel protective and strong. Not this Amazon who looked like she could protect him. "I'm Magnolia Hawthorne," she said, stepping closer to the gate. "I believe you're expecting me." Expecting her? He'd been expecting someone who could wear his departed mother's wedding dress without splitting the seams. Someone who would look up at him with admiration, not down at him with those unreadable dark eyes. His hands shook as he reached for her single carpet bag, the worn leather handle slippery with his nervous sweat. The bag was heavier than he expected, and he nearly dropped it, which brought another round of barely suppressed laughter from his audience. This way, he managed to croak, his voice coming out higher than usual. As they walked toward his modest ranch house, the townspeople began to disperse, but their voices carried on the wind. "Bless his heart, what's he gonna do with her? She could probably eat him out of house and home. Wonder if she's got the temperament to match that size." Each word felt like a slap. Jasper had been the subject of town gossip before. The lonely bachelor rancher who finally got desperate enough to send away for a bride. But this was different. This was public humiliation on a scale he'd never imagined. Magnolia walked beside him in silence, a long stride forcing him to hurry to keep up. Her boots, sturdy work boots, not the delicate slippers he'd envisioned, kicked up small clouds of dust with each step. Everything about her spoke of hard work and harder living, not the gentle domesticity he'd dreamed of. The photograph in his pocket felt heavier with each step. He'd stared at it so many times over the past months, memorizing every detail of the woman who was supposed to become his wife. Violet, she'd signed her letter. Sweet, fragile Violet, who wrote about wanting to see mountains and raise children and plant a garden full of flowers. This woman looked like she could uproot trees with her bare hands. When they reached his front porch, Magnolia turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten, not with anger, but with something uncomfortably close to sympathy. She'd heard every whispered comment, seen every shocked stare. Whatever game was being played here, she was as much a victim of it as he was. "I suppose you want an explanation," she said quietly. He pulled the photograph from his pocket with trembling fingers and held it out between them. The woman in the picture smiled up at them both, golden-haired, blue-eyed, and tiny enough to fit in his arms like a child. "This isn't you." Her dark eyes flickered to the photograph, then back to his face. For just a moment, a composed mask slipped, and he saw raw pain flash across her features. "No," she whispered. "It's not." But before she could say more, before he could demand answers, the front door of his house swung open. Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch stood there with a basket of welcome food, her mouth falling open at the sight of his unexpected bride. "Oh my," Mrs. Henderson breathed, her eyes wide as saucers. "Oh my stars and garters." Jasper felt something harden in his chest, not just humiliation now, but determination. He'd been made a fool of, that much was clear. Someone had played him for a sucker, and he intended to find out who and why. But first he had to figure out what to do with the woman standing before him. This stranger who carried another woman's name and held secrets in her dark eyes. One thing was certain, his quiet, predictable life was over. Mrs. Henderson's basket of food sat untouched on Jasper's kitchen table as the three of them stood in awkward silence. The older woman kept glancing between Jasper and Magnolia like she was watching a circus act she couldn't quite believe. "Well," Mrs. Henderson finally said, her voice unnaturally bright, "I'll just leave you two to get acquainted." She practically fled through the front door, and Jasper knew that within an hour every soul in town would know about his oversized bride. The silence stretched like taffy as Magnolia sat across from him at his small wooden table. She had removed her bonnet, revealing auburn hair that caught the lamplight. Despite her intimidating size, there was an undeniable beauty in her strong features, high cheekbones, full lips, and those dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets. "I suppose you want an explanation," she said finally, her fingers tracing nervous patterns on the worn tabletop. Jasper pulled the photograph from his pocket and placed it between them like evidence in a trial. The woman in the picture was tiny, with golden ringlets and a coy smile that had haunted his dreams for months. "This isn't you?" "No." Magnolia's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's my sister, Violet." "Your sister?" Jasper's anger flared like a struck match. "Where is she then? Why are you here instead?" Magnolia's composure cracked like ice under pressure. For the first time, Jasper saw vulnerability beneath her strong exterior. Her hands trembled as she spoke, and her voice broke. "Violet died of fever 3 weeks ago. I had nowhere else to go." The words hit Jasper like a physical blow to the chest. He had expected deceit, perhaps a cruel joke played by bored townspeople, but not this. Not death. Not genuine tragedy. "So you decided to take her place." His voice came out harsher than he intended, "to trick me into thinking she was still alive. I didn't know what else to do." Magnolia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor like fingernails on slate. "I have no family left, no money, nowhere to turn. Violet had already accepted your proposal, taken your money for the train fare. I thought, you hoped I'd be desperate enough to keep you anyway." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but he saw how they wounded her, saw her flinch as if he'd struck her. Magnolia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller despite her impressive height. "I know I'm not what you wanted. I know I'm not pretty like Violet was, not delicate or refined. But I can work hard. I can cook and clean and help with the ranch work. I won't be a burden to you." Jasper studied her face, seeing the fear she tried so hard to hide behind that mask of strength. This woman had traveled across half the country with nothing but hope and desperation driving her. She had buried her sister and stepped into a stranger's life because she literally had no other choice. The anger in his chest began to shift into something more complicated. Sympathy warred with betrayal. Understanding fought with hurt pride. "The agreement was for marriage," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. "I understand if you can't." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the possibility of being sent away with nowhere to go. Jasper stood and moved to the window, staring out at his lonely acres bathed in late afternoon sunlight. He had dreamed of a wife for so long, someone to share meals with, to talk to during the long evenings, to help build something meaningful together. The woman in the photograph had seemed like the answer to years of solitude. The woman sitting at his table was nothing like his dreams, but she was here, and she was real, and she was in trouble. "You can stay in Violet's room tonight," he said without turning around. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." He heard her sharp intake of breath, the relief in her voice when she whispered, "Thank you." As Magnolia climbed the narrow stairs to the small guest room, her carpet bag clutched in her strong hands, neither of them noticed the letter that had fallen from the bag's torn lining, a letter with a St. Louis postmark and Mrs. Frederick Ashworth written in familiar handwriting. Later, lying in his narrow bed, Jasper stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of the day's events. His mail-order bride was dead, replaced by her desperate sister who was nothing like what he'd expected or wanted. His neat, ordered life had been turned upside down by a woman who could probably outwork most men and who looked at him like she expected to be thrown out at any moment. But there had been something in her eyes when she talked about Violet, something in the way her voice broke when she mentioned being alone. Real grief, real fear. Whatever else Magnolia Hawthorne might be hiding, her pain was genuine. From the room above, he could hear the soft sounds of someone trying very hard not to cry. Tomorrow, he would have to decide what kind of man he really was. The kind who turned away a woman in desperate need, or the kind who took a chance on something unexpected. Outside his window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain and change in equal measure. Dawn broke grey and cold over the Thornfield ranch, and Jasper woke to the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from his kitchen. He dressed quickly and found Magnolia at his stove, her sleeves rolled up past her elbows, tending to breakfast with the sure movements of someone who knew her way around hard work. "You don't have to," he began. "I told you I could work," she interrupted without looking at him. "I meant it." They ate in uncomfortable silence, stealing glances at each other across the small table. In the morning light streaming through his kitchen window, Jasper noticed things he had missed the night before. The calluses on Magnolia's hands spoke of years of physical labor. The determined set of her jaw showed a woman who had faced hardship and survived it. The way she held herself with quiet dignity despite everything that had happened. After breakfast, she followed him outside without being asked. When he began repairing a section of fence damaged in the recent storm, she was there, holding posts steady and handing him tools before he could ask for them. Her strength was obvious. She lifted heavy wooden beams that would have challenged most men, but she worked with a gentle precision that surprised him. "You've done this before," he observed, watching her drive a nail with perfect accuracy. "My family had a farm back in Ohio," she said, not pausing in her work. "Before the drought took everything we had." As the morning wore on, they fell into an easy rhythm. Magnolia proved herself capable of every task she attempted. She knew which tool he needed before he asked for it. She could read the weather in the clouds and the mood of the animals by their movements. When one of his cows got her head stuck in a fence rail, Magnolia freed her with patient gentleness, while Jasper watched in amazement. Violet could never have done this, he found himself thinking, then felt guilty for the comparison. By midday, they had repaired more fence than Jasper usually managed in a week working alone. Magnolia's brown dress was dusty and her hair had come loose from its bun, but she showed no signs of slowing down. "We should stop for lunch," Jasper said. "If you're tired," she replied, but there was no mockery in her voice, just simple acceptance. They sat in the shade of his old oak tree, sharing water from his canteen and the sandwiches she had packed. For the first time since her arrival, the silence between them felt comfortable instead of strained. "Tell me about the farm in Ohio," Jasper said. Magnolia's hand stilled on her sandwich. "Not much to tell. My parents died when I was 18. Violet was only 15, so I took care of her and tried to keep the farm running. We did all right for a few years, but then the rains stopped coming. Lost the crops 3 years in a row, had to sell everything just to eat. That's when Violet decided to answer my advertisement. She saw it in a newspaper someone left at the general store. Said it sounded like an adventure." Magnolia's voice grew soft. Violet always dreamed of seeing new places, having exciting things happen to her. She thought coming west would be like the stories in those dime novels she loved to read. Jasper thought about the letters he had received, full of romantic notions about mountain sunsets and wildflower gardens. They made more sense now, coming from a young woman who had never traveled beyond the next county. "And you? What did you dream about?" Magnolia was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. "I dreamed about being useful," she said finally, "about belonging somewhere and having work that mattered." The simple honesty of her words hit him harder than any declaration of love could have. Here was a woman who didn't ask for romance or adventure, just the chance to be needed. That afternoon they worked together, moving hay bales into the barn ahead of the storm that was building in the western sky. Magnolia lifted and carried loads that most men would struggle with, but she did it without complaint or show. When they finished, she helped him check on the horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that calmed even his most skittish mare. "She likes you," Jasper said, watching his horse nuzzle Magnolia's shoulder. "Animals can tell when someone understands hard work," Magnolia replied, stroking the mare's neck. "They respect honesty." As evening approached, they sat on his front porch watching the storm clouds build. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, and lightning flickered in the distance. "Storm's coming," Magnolia observed. "Good thing we got the hay in." She nodded, then surprised him by speaking again. "Jasper? Thank you for letting me stay the night. I know this isn't what you wanted." "It's not what I expected," he interrupted, "but that doesn't mean it's not what I needed." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. For a moment something passed between them, understanding perhaps, or the beginning of something deeper. Then the first drops of rain began to fall, sending them both inside to the warmth of his kitchen, where the coffee pot waited and the day's work had earned them both a rest. As Jasper listened to Magnolia moving quietly around his house, humming softly as she tidied up from supper, he realized something had changed. The woman who had stepped off that wagon yesterday was not the bride he had ordered, but she was becoming something more important. She was becoming a partner. But tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the letter hidden in her room would soon change everything they thought they knew about each other. Jasper found the letter while helping Magnolia reorganize the guest room. She had mentioned wanting to make the space more comfortable, and he had offered to help move the heavy dresser away from the wall. When he bent to retrieve a fallen book, his heart stopped at the sight of the envelope that had slipped from behind the furniture. "Magnolia," he called, his voice strange and tight. She appeared in the doorway, dustcloth in hand, and froze solid when she saw what he held in his trembling fingers. "This is from Violet," he said, unfolding the letter with careful hands. "Postmarked just 5 days ago." The color drained from Magnolia's face like water from a broken bucket. "Jasper, I can explain." But he was already reading, his expression growing darker with each line of familiar handwriting. The words seemed to burn themselves into his mind as he read them twice, then a third time, unable to believe what he was seeing. "She's not dead, is she?" His voice was deadly quiet when he finally looked up. "She's alive and well in St. Louis, married to some banker named Frederick Ashworth." Magnolia sank onto the narrow bed, her strong frame suddenly looking fragile as old paper. She changed her mind. About coming here. About marrying you. She met Frederick at the hotel and fell in love with him. So you decided to take her place. Each word came out like a nail being hammered into wood. To lie to me about her being dead. She was going to write and tell you the truth, but she was afraid you'd demand the money back. Magnolia's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. Money we'd already spent on medicine for our sick aunt. I said I'd come instead, just until we could find a way to pay you back. Jasper crumpled the letter in his fist, the paper crackling like dry leaves. "You've been lying to me for days. Every meal we've shared, every conversation we've had, every moment I started to think maybe this could work, all built on lies." Not everything was a lie. Magnolia stood, her own anger finally breaking through like a dam bursting. "My feelings about this place, about the work we've done together, about—" She stopped herself before saying too much, but Jasper had heard enough. "About what?" "About me." He laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "How can I believe anything you say now? You let me think your sister was dead. You let me comfort you over a grave that doesn't exist. Because I didn't know how else to survive." The words exploded from her like gunshots. "Do you think this was easy for me? Do you think I wanted to lie to you? I saw how you looked at me when I got off that wagon. I saw the disappointment in your face when you realized what you'd gotten instead of what you'd ordered. So you figured you'd string me along until you could find something better." "No." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained strong. "I figured I'd work hard enough to earn my keep until I could pay back what we owed you. But then what? Then I started to care about you." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they could cross. "I started to hope that maybe you could care about me too, not because I was Violet, but because I was myself." Jasper stared at her, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. Part of him wanted to gather her in his arms and tell her none of it mattered, but the larger part felt betrayed and used, like a fool who had been played for a sucker. "Pack your things," he said coldly. "I'll take you to town in the morning. You can catch the next train back to wherever it is you really belong." The words hit Magnolia like physical blows. She wrapped her arms around herself and nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. That night, the house felt emptier than it had in years. Jasper sat at his kitchen table, reading Violet's letter over and over, trying to understand how he had been so completely deceived. The letter was full of apologies and explanations, but also excitement about her new life with Frederick. She mentioned expensive hotels and fine clothes and social events that made Jasper's simple ranch life seem poor and dull by comparison. From upstairs came the soft sounds of packing dresser drawers opening and closing, the rustle of fabric being folded. Once he thought he heard crying, but it might have been the wind whistling through the eaves. He tried to summon back his anger, to fuel his sense of betrayal, but all he could think about was the way Magnolia had worked beside him, the gentleness with which she had treated his animals, the quiet contentment in her voice when she talked about belonging somewhere. Had that all been an act too? As dawn approached, Jasper made coffee with shaking hands. He had grown used to waking to the smell of Magnolia's cooking, to her quiet presence moving around his kitchen. The silence felt oppressive, like the air before a terrible storm. When morning came, Magnolia appeared at the top of the stairs with her battered carpet bag, dressed in the same brown traveling dress she had worn when she arrived. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her chin was set with the same determination he had come to recognize. "I'm ready," she said simply. But as they prepared to leave for town, neither of them knew that fate had one more surprise in store. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn toward the road, where a rider was coming fast, his horse lathered with sweat and his face grim with urgent news. Everything they thought they knew about each other was about to change again. They were loading Magnolia's carpet bag into the wagon when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. A rider was coming fast across the prairie, his horse's sides heaving and foam flying from its mouth. As he drew closer, Magnolia let out a sharp gasp. "Thomas?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the thunder of hooves. The man pulled up sharply, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. He was tall and lean, with worried brown eyes and travel-worn clothes that spoke of hard riding. Without hesitation, he strode straight to Magnolia and pulled her into his arms. "Maggie, thank God I found you," he said, his hands checking her over as if to make sure she was unharmed. Jasper watched the reunion with growing confusion and a strange twist in his chest that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. This Thomas embraced Magnolia with the easy familiarity of long friendship. Maybe something more. "What are you doing here?" Magnolia asked, pulling back from the embrace. "How did you even find me?" "Violet told me where you'd gone." Thomas's voice was urgent, breathless from his hard ride. "Maggie, you have to come home with me. Right now." "I can't. There's nothing left for me there." "Yes, there is." Thomas grabbed her hands in both of his eyes bright with excitement. "The drought is over, Maggie. The rains came back, and the land is healing. More than that, the railroad company wants to buy a right-of-way through your family's old property. They're offering enough money to rebuild everything your family lost." Jasper cleared his throat, feeling like an outsider watching someone else's life unfold. Perhaps someone should explain who this gentleman is. Magnolia turned to him, her face flushed with confusion, and something that might have been hope. "Thomas Brennan. He owns the farm next to what used to be ours back in Ohio." "I own the farm next to what's going to be yours again," Thomas corrected, his voice full of conviction. "And I've been in love with you since we were children, Maggie. I should have told you years ago, but I was a coward." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jasper felt something cold and sharp twist in his chest, an emotion he didn't want to name but couldn't ignore. "Thomas, please," Magnolia said quietly. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" Thomas looked between her and Jasper, taking in the wagon, the carpet bag, the obvious tension between them. "You came out here to marry a stranger because you thought you had no choice. Well, now you do have a choice. Come home with me, Maggie. Marry me instead." Jasper watched Magnolia's face, looking for some sign of what she was thinking. Her dark eyes were wide, caught between two worlds, two possibilities she had never expected to face. "The railroad money," Thomas continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It's enough to restore your family's farm and expand mine too. We could combine the properties, work them together like our fathers always talked about. Build the life we should have had before everything went wrong." "You never asked me before," Magnolia said softly. "All those years after my parents died, and you never said anything about your feelings." Thomas's face reddened. "I was a fool and a coward. I thought you were too good for a simple farmer like me. I thought maybe someday I'd work up the courage, but then the drought came and everything fell apart." It wasn't until you were gone that I realized I'd rather risk being turned down than lose you forever." Jasper found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Seems to me the lady has a decision to make." But even as he said it, his heart was breaking. How could he compete with a man who had known Magnolia since childhood, who offered her not just love but a chance to reclaim her past, to restore everything she had lost? "I need time to think," Magnolia said, her voice small. "There isn't much time," Thomas replied urgently. "The railroad deal won't wait forever, and I can't stay away from the farm much longer. The autumn planting has to be done soon, and if we're going to rebuild your place before winter—" "Then go," Magnolia interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Go back to Ohio. If this is real, if the offer is genuine, then it will still be there in a few weeks." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. He glanced at Jasper, sizing him up with the careful attention of a man marking his competition. "2 weeks, Maggie," he said finally. "I'll give you 2 weeks to think it over. Then I'm coming back for you, whether you're ready to decide or not." He swung back onto his horse, the animal still breathing hard from the desperate ride. "Don't let pride or stubbornness keep you from coming home where you belong." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped back the way he had come, leaving a cloud of dust and unanswered questions in his wake. Jasper and Magnolia stood in the yard, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. The wagon was still loaded with her belongings, but somehow the urgency to leave had drained away. "I suppose you'll be wanting to go back with him," Jasper said finally. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth was, everything had changed again. The woman he had been ready to send away now had choices he couldn't compete with, and the woman who had been preparing to leave now had to decide between a past that promised restoration and a future that offered only uncertainty. But as they stood there in the morning sunlight, both lost in their own thoughts, neither of them could shake the feeling that the most important choice had nothing to do with money or land or childhood promises. It had everything to do with the way they had worked together, laughed together, and started to build something neither of them had expected to find. The next few days passed in a strange limbo. Magnolia didn't pack to leave, but she didn't unpack her carpet bag either. It sat by the guest room door like a silent reminder that nothing was settled. She went through the motions of her daily routine, cooking breakfast, tending the garden, helping with ranch work, but there was a distance to her now, as if part of her had already left with Thomas. Jasper found himself watching her constantly, trying to memorize the way she hummed while kneading bread, the gentle way she spoke to the horses, the quiet strength in her capable hands. He had never been a man of many words, but now he felt the weight of everything he hadn't said pressing against his chest like a stone. On the third evening after Thomas's visit, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. But tonight, the comfortable silence felt strained, full of thoughts neither dared speak aloud. "Tell me about him," Jasper said finally, his voice cutting through the evening air. "About Thomas." Magnolia was quiet for a long moment, her hands folded carefully in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was soft, thoughtful. "We grew up together. His farm bordered ours, and after my parents died, he helped me keep our place running. He taught me how to repair fences and read the weather signs. He's a good man, Jasper. Honest and hard-working. You love him." It wasn't a question, but Magnolia answered anyway. "I thought I did once upon a time. When we were young, I imagined we might marry someday, but he never spoke of it. Never gave me any sign that he felt the same way. Then the drought came, and I had to focus on survival instead of dreams. And now he's offering you both, love and security." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes unreadable in the lamplight spilling from the house windows. "Now I don't know what love is supposed to feel like anymore," Jasper felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The question that had been burning in his throat for days finally escaped. "What does it feel like with me?" The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they dared cross. Magnolia's breath caught, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. "Like coming home," she whispered finally, "like belonging somewhere for the first time in my life." Jasper stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden porch boards. He moved to the railing, gripping it with white knuckles, his back to her as he struggled with emotions he had never learned to name. "Then why are you even considering leaving?" The words came out rougher than he intended. "Because Thomas offers me something you can't," she said, rising to stand behind him. He could feel her presence like warmth from a fire. Security. A real marriage proposal. Not just an arrangement that started with deception. A chance to rebuild everything my family lost. He turned to face her, and she was startled by the raw emotion in his blue eyes. "What is this between us, Magnolia? Really?" She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came. They stood there in the gathering darkness, close enough to touch but separated by everything they couldn't say. "I never properly asked you to marry me," Jasper said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not really. You came here as someone else's bride, stayed out of necessity. Maybe that's not enough foundation for a life together." "Maybe it's not," she agreed, but her voice broke slightly on the words. The next morning Jasper woke to find Magnolia in the kitchen as usual, but she was different somehow, more resolved, as if she had made some kind of decision during the sleepless night. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble as he poured his coffee, "about what you said last night." Jasper's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "And you're right. What we have, it started with lies and desperation. Maybe that's too much to overcome." She wouldn't meet his eyes as she spoke. "Maybe I should write to Thomas. Tell him I'll come back to Ohio with him." The words hit Jasper like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. "If that's what you think is best." "It's practical," she said, but he caught the uncertainty in her voice. "The smart choice, the safe choice." "Smart," he repeated, the word tasting bitter as medicine in his mouth. That afternoon Magnolia sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen, trying to write to Thomas, but every time she began, the words seemed wrong. How could she explain that leaving this place felt like tearing part of herself away? How could she put into words the way Jasper made her feel valued for who she was, not what she could provide? From the window, she could see him working in the corral with a new colt, his movements patient and sure. She had watched him work with difficult animals before, seen how he earned their trust through consistency and gentle strength. It was the same way he had treated her. Not pushing, not demanding, just being steadily, reliably there when she needed him. The letter remained blank as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. That night, neither of them could eat much supper. The food sat heavy and tasteless on their plates, while unspoken words filled the space between them. "When will Thomas be back?" Jasper asked finally, breaking the silence. "A week, maybe less." Her voice was barely audible. He nodded slowly. "I'll take you to town when he comes, help you get settled before the train leaves." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." His blue eyes met hers across the table, and she saw pain there that matched her own. "Despite everything that's happened between us, I care what becomes of you, Magnolia. I want you to be happy, even if that happiness isn't with me." That night, lying in her narrow bed, Magnolia stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine her life back in Ohio, working her family's restored farm, married to Thomas, settling into the familiar patterns of a place she had known all her life. It should have felt like coming home, like reclaiming everything she had lost. Instead, it felt like giving up the best thing that had ever happened to her. But sometimes, She told herself firmly, giving up was the same thing as growing up. Sometimes the smart choice and the right choice were the same thing, even when they broke your heart. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered again on the horizon, and she wondered if she would ever feel settled anywhere, or if she was destined to always be caught between what was safe and what made her truly alive. Thomas returned exactly 7 days later, but he wasn't alone. With him rode a well-dressed stranger in a city suit and a woman Jasper recognized immediately from the photograph he still kept in his shirt pocket. Violet. Magnolia emerged from the house at the sound of hoofbeats, her face going pale as winter when she saw her sister dismounting from a fancy side saddle with practiced grace. "Hello, Maggie," Violet said, her voice musical and light as birdsong. She was indeed everything the photograph had promised, petite and golden-haired, with bright blue eyes and delicate features that belonged in a painting. "I suppose you're surprised to see me." "Violet." Magnolia's voice was barely a whisper, like she was seeing a ghost. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up the mess you've made, apparently." Violet's tone was sweet as honey, but there was steel beneath it that made Jasper's skin crawl. "Thomas told me what you've been doing, pretending to be me, deceiving this poor man." She gestured toward Jasper with a gloved hand that had never seen a day's hard work. The well-dressed stranger stepped forward, removing his hat with practiced politeness. "Frederick Ashworth," he introduced himself to Jasper. "I'm Violet's husband." Thomas moved to Magnolia's side, his face grim as a winter morning. "We need to talk, Maggie. All of us. There are things you need to know." They gathered in Jasper's small parlor, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Violet perched on the edge of the settee like a beautiful bird that might fly away at any moment, while Frederick stood protectively behind her. Thomas took a chair near Magnolia, and Jasper remained standing by the fireplace, his arms crossed over his chest. "First things first," Violet began, her voice taking on a business-like tone that surprised Jasper. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Thornfield, and an explanation." "I'm listening." "I never intended to actually marry you. I was desperate, you see. Our aunt was dying, and we needed money for doctors and medicine. Your offer seemed like an answer to our prayers, so you took my money and ran off with another man." Jasper's voice was flat as a board. "I fell in love," Violet said, but her tone was defensive now. "Frederick and I met at the hotel where I was staying before taking the train west. We were married within a week." "With my money," Jasper pointed out. Frederick shifted uncomfortably behind his wife's chair. "Which is why we're here. I'm prepared to repay you, with interest." "And the railroad deal?" Magnolia asked Thomas quietly. "Is that real?" "Real enough," he replied, but his voice carried doubt. "But not as simple as I made it sound. The money would be enough to rebuild, yes, but it would take years to see it. And there are conditions." Violet leaned forward, her blue eyes bright with what looked like genuine concern. "Maggie, you can't stay here. It's not fair to Mr. Thornfield or to yourself. You're living a lie." "She's not living anything," Jasper said sharply, speaking for the first time in several minutes. "She's been honest about who she is from the moment I discovered the truth." "Has she?" Violet's smile was sharp as a blade. "Has she told you about David?" The name hit the room like a thunderbolt. Magnolia went white as fresh snow, and Thomas looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Violet, don't." Magnolia whispered. "Don't what?" "Tell him about your fiancé back in Ohio? The one you were supposed to marry before the farm failed?" Jasper felt the ground shift beneath his feet like an earthquake. "Fiancé? David Morrison," Violet continued with cruel precision. "They were engaged for 2 years. The wedding was planned for last spring. But when we lost the farm, David broke it off. Said he couldn't marry a woman with nothing to offer." "That's enough," Thomas said sharply, his face flushed with anger. But Violet wasn't finished twisting the knife. David's back now, Maggie. He heard about the railroad money and suddenly you're interesting to him again. He's been asking Thomas about you, wondering if you might reconsider his proposal. Magnolia stood abruptly, her chair toppling backward with a crash. Stop it, Violet. Just stop. I'm trying to help you see reason. Violet's mask of sweetness finally slipped, showing the selfish woman beneath. You have real options now. A man who loved you enough to want you back, a childhood friend who's finally found his courage, money to rebuild your life. You don't have to settle for playing house with a stranger. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Jasper looked at Magnolia, seeing the truth written in her stricken face. Another secret, another piece of her past she had never mentioned. Is it true? He asked quietly. Magnolia's hands were shaking like leaves in a storm. Yes. But Jasper, it's not what you think. Not what? His voice was deadly calm, the way it got when he was fighting to control his temper. Not what it sounds like. Another thing you forgot to mention. Like Thomas being in love with you, like Violet being alive, like having a fiancé waiting for you back home. David isn't waiting for me. He made his choice clear when he ended our engagement. But he's changed his mind now that you're worth something again. It wasn't a question. Thomas stood, his face flushed with righteous anger. Maggie would never go back to a man who treated her that way. Wouldn't she? Jasper looked directly at Magnolia, his blue eyes cold as winter ice. Seems like she's got quite a few men to choose from now. The childhood sweetheart who finally found his courage, the fiancé who wants her back now that she's got prospects, and the fool rancher who actually started to believe this arrangement might work. Jasper, please. No. He moved toward the door, needing air, needing space to think. I think you folks have some talking to do, and I think I need to figure out if there's any part of this that was ever real. He walked out into the gathering dusk, leaving the 4 visitors in his parlor, and kept walking until he reached the barn. There, he saddled his horse and rode out into the darkness, needing distance from the lies and half-truths that seemed to multiply every time he thought he understood what was happening. Behind him, in the lamplight spilling from his house windows, Magnolia sank into her overturned chair and finally allowed herself to cry for everything she was about to lose. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. Tomorrow would bring one final truth that would change everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the price of happiness. When Jasper returned near midnight, he found the house dark, except for a single lamp burning in the kitchen. The visitors had made camp by the creek, and Magnolia sat alone at the table, still fully dressed, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Thought you might have left with them," he said, hanging his hat on its peg by the door. "Where would I go?" Her voice was hoarse from tears. "Seems like everywhere I turn, there are people who think they know what's best for me." Jasper poured himself water from the pitcher, his movements careful and controlled. The ride in the cool night air had helped settle his anger, but the hurt remained like a stone in his chest. Maybe they do know what's best. Maybe I'm the only one who doesn't have your interests at heart. Is that what you think? He turned to study her face in the lamplight. She looked exhausted, beaten down in a way he had never seen before. Her strong shoulders were slumped, and her hands lay flat on the table like she didn't have the energy to lift them. "I think I don't know you at all. Every time I start to believe I do, another secret comes to light. First Violet being alive, now this David fellow, and who knows what else you haven't told me. I never meant for it to happen this way." "Which part?" His voice was steady, but she could hear the pain underneath. "Coming here under false pretenses? Lying about your sister being dead? Forgetting to mention the fiancé who broke your heart?" Magnolia flinched at each accusation, but she didn't defend herself. She just sat there taking it like she deserved every word. "You have every right to be angry with me," she said finally. Do I? Because I'm not sure what rights I have in this situation anymore. I'm not your husband, not your fiancé, not your childhood sweetheart. I'm just the man who got fooled. You're more than that. The words were so quiet he almost missed them. Am I? Then tell me, Magnolia, no more secrets, no more half-truths. Tell me who you really are and what you really want. She was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but filled with a lifetime of pain. My name is Magnolia Ruth Hawthorne. I'm 26 years old and I've been taking care of other people my whole life. My parents died when I was 18, and I raised Violet while trying to keep the farm running. David Morrison courted me for 2 years, but it was never about love. It was about the land his family wanted to buy from ours. She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. When the drought came and we lost everything, David broke our engagement in a letter. Didn't even have the courage to tell me face to face. Said he couldn't marry a woman who had nothing to offer. And Thomas? Thomas helped us survive that first winter after we lost the farm. But he never said how he felt, never gave me reason to hope for anything more than neighborly kindness. I thought maybe someday, but then Violet got your letter and everything changed. So you came here. I came here because Violet fell in love with Frederick and couldn't bring herself to disappoint you. She was so happy, Jasper. I'd never seen her like that before. How could I ruin it by telling her we couldn't pay you back? Jasper's anger began to crack, replaced by something more complicated. But you stayed. I stayed because... She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. Because for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not because someone needed me to take care of them, not because I was useful, but because I was enough, just as I am. And now, with all these choices laid out in front of you, Thomas offers me love and a chance to reclaim my past. David offers wealth and social standing, though I wouldn't trust his motives if my life depended on it. Violet thinks I should take the safe route, marry for security instead of taking risks. What do you offer yourself? The question seemed to surprise her. I don't understand. What do you want, Magnolia? Not what's practical, not what makes sense to other people, not what's safe. What do you want? She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. A kind of awakening, as if she was asking herself that question for the first time in her life. I want to stay here. With you. The words came out in a rush, like she was afraid she'd lose her courage if she hesitated. I want to build something real together, even if it started with lies and mistakes. I want to wake up every morning knowing I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though I can't offer you the railroad money or restored land or your childhood dreams, you're offering me something none of them can, which is a future I never dared to imagine. She stood, moving closer to him. Jasper, I know I've given you every reason not to trust me. I know I've handled everything wrong from the very beginning, but I'm not asking you to forgive the past. I'm asking if you think we might have a future. Jasper looked into her face, seeing not the deceptive mail-order bride or the desperate woman with too many secrets, but the partner who had worked beside him, the woman who had made his house a home, the person who had somehow become essential to his happiness. What about them? He asked, gesturing toward the window where lamplight flickered from the visitors' camp. Your sister, Thomas, even David, they're all waiting for an answer. Then I should give them one. The next morning, Magnolia walked out to the camp by the creek where the others were preparing breakfast over an open fire. Jasper followed at a distance, close enough to hear, but far enough to give her space to speak her mind. I've made my decision, she announced without any greeting or small talk. Thomas looked up hopefully from the coffee pot. Violet set down her cup with delicate precision. Frederick continued eating, but his attention was clearly focused on her words. Thomas, you're a good man, and I'm honored that you finally found the courage to tell me how you feel. But I don't love you the way you deserve to be loved, and I won't pretend otherwise just for security. His face fell, but he nodded with quiet dignity. I figured as much when I saw how you looked at him. Doesn't change how I feel about you, Maggie. Violet. Frederick, thank you for coming all this way to sort things out. Frederick, I appreciate your offer to repay Jasper, but that's between him and me now. And David? Violet asked, her voice sharp with disapproval. David made his feelings clear when he broke our engagement. I have no interest in reconsidering a man who only wants me when I'm worth something to him. So you're staying here, Thomas said quietly. With him. If he'll have me. All eyes turned to Jasper, who had been standing silent by the corral fence. He walked slowly toward the group, his expression unreadable in the morning light. Seems to me, he said finally, that a man would be a fool to turn down a woman brave enough to cross the country for a new life, strong enough to work beside him as an equal partner, and honest enough to finally tell him the complete truth. Magnolia's face blazed with hope and relief. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, Jasper closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his weathered hands. Magnolia Ruth Hawthorne, will you marry me? Not because of any arrangement or out of desperation, but because I love you exactly as you are. Her answer was lost in their kiss, but everyone could see it written in the way she melted against him, in the joy that transformed her strong features, in the rightness of two people finally finding where they belonged. As the others began packing to leave, Thomas with quiet sadness, Violet with obvious disapproval, Frederick with visible relief, Jasper and Magnolia stood together in the morning sunlight, holding each other close. But even in that moment of happiness, neither of them knew that the most shocking revelation was still to come. Before the day was over, they would discover that nothing they thought they knew about Violet's marriage was true, and that the real villain in their story was someone they had trusted completely. The wedding was set for the following Sunday, giving them a week to prepare and allowing word to spread through the small community. Violet and Frederick decided to stay for the ceremony, though Violet's disapproval was written plainly on her delicate features. Thomas, despite his heartbreak, agreed to stand as Jasper's best man. It's the least I can do, he told Magnolia privately. I waited too long to speak up. I won't be a sore loser on top of being a fool. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Magnolia altered one of Violet's dresses, a pale blue silk that complemented her dark hair and strong features better than it ever had her petite sister. The local minister agreed to perform the ceremony, and the townspeople, who had initially whispered about the unusual circumstances, began to warm to the idea of their solitary rancher finally finding happiness. On Saturday evening, as Magnolia sat on the porch mending a final tear in her wedding dress, a rider approached through the gathering dusk. But this wasn't another unexpected visitor from her past. This was Sheriff Coleman from town, and his weathered face was grim as a storm cloud. Evening, Miss Hawthorne. Jasper, he said, tipping his hat. I'm afraid I have some troubling news that can't wait until after your wedding. Jasper emerged from the house, his shirt sleeves rolled up from helping with wedding preparations. What's wrong, Sheriff? Got a telegram from the authorities in St. Louis today. Seems there's been some questions raised about a Frederick Ashworth and his new wife. The sheriff's eyes fixed on the camp by the creek where Violet and Frederick had retired for the night. Questions about missing money and some forged marriage documents. Magnolia's needle stilled in her hand. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest Mr. Ashworth might not be the respectable businessman he claims to be. The kind that suggest he might have married your sister for reasons that have nothing to do with love. Before anyone could respond, shouting erupted from the creek. Thomas's voice, raised in anger, carried across the night air. followed by Frederick's more cultured tones and Violet's frightened cry. They ran toward the camp, arriving to find Thomas standing over Frederick, who was on the ground holding his bleeding nose. Violet knelt beside her husband, her face pale in the firelight, her beautiful features twisted with fear and confusion. "What's going on here?" Jasper demanded. "Ask him," Thomas spat, gesturing at Frederick. "Ask him why he's been going through Violet's things, looking for some kind of papers." Frederick struggled to his feet, straightening his expensive vest with wounded dignity. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Thomas pulled a leather portfolio from behind his back. "Then what's this? And why were you so interested in that letter Violet carries from her great-aunt Martha?" Violet looked confused, her blue eyes wide with innocent bewilderment. "Frederick, what letter? Aunt Martha never wrote to us. She died years ago." "The one you've been carrying since Ohio," Frederick said quickly, but his smooth confidence was starting to crack. "The one about her final wishes and the property she left." But Sheriff Coleman was already examining the portfolio Thomas had taken. His expression grew darker as he read through the papers inside. "Miss Violet," the sheriff said slowly, "did you know your husband has been corresponding with lawyers in Chicago about an inheritance from a Martha Hawthorne? An inheritance worth considerable money." "Aunt Martha died with nothing," Magnolia said, her voice growing cold with understanding. "She lost everything in bad investments years ago. That's why we couldn't afford proper medicine when she got sick." "According to these letters," the sheriff continued, "Martha Hawthorne owned property in Chicago that she left to her great-nieces, property worth thousands of dollars that's been sitting in legal custody, waiting for the heirs to claim it." The pieces began falling into place like dominoes in Magnolia's mind. Violet's face went white as fresh snow as the truth dawned on her. "Frederick," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you knew about the inheritance when you met me at the hotel." "Violet, darling, let me explain. You married me for money." Her voice was barely audible, just like David was going to do to Maggie. "You never loved me at all." Frederick's carefully maintained facade finally cracked completely. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I needed that inheritance to pay off gambling debts. When I met you at the hotel and learned your name, I thought fate had handed me a solution, but then I realized you didn't know about the inheritance, and I couldn't exactly tell you without raising suspicions. So you married her and planned to what?" Jasper's voice was dangerously quiet. "Convince her to sign some papers once we were settled. Tell her it was about securing our future together." Frederick looked around at the circle of condemning faces. "But I do love her. That part hasn't entirely a lie." "Love?" Violet stood slowly, her small frame trembling with rage and betrayal. "You've been planning to steal from me and my sister since the day we met." "Not steal. The inheritance is rightfully yours. I just needed a loan against it to clear my debts." Sheriff Coleman folded the papers with deliberate care. "Mr. Ashworth, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. There are warrants out for your arrest in 3 states for confidence schemes, very similar to this one." As Frederick was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his love for Violet, the true scope of the deception became clear. There was indeed an inheritance, enough money to change both sisters' lives completely. But more than that, Violet had been as much a victim as anyone else. "I'm so sorry, Maggie," she cried, throwing herself into her sister's arms. "I thought I had found true love. I was so cruel to you, so superior, when all along I was the one being fooled." Magnolia held her sister close, understanding flooding through her like warm sunlight. "You couldn't have known, Violet. None of us could have known. But I should have. And I was so awful to you about staying here, about Jasper. I think I was jealous. You found something real while I was living a lie." Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly. "What happens now? With the inheritance, I mean." Magnolia looked at Jasper, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his concerned blue eyes. The inheritance changed everything, or did it? Now, she said firmly, taking Jasper's hand, we have our wedding tomorrow, and then we figure out the rest together. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for a wedding. But the events of the previous night had changed everything. Violet sat red-eyed at the kitchen table while Magnolia made coffee with steady hands. You don't have to go through with it, Violet said quietly. The wedding, I mean. You have real choices now. Real money. Such as, with your share of the inheritance, you could go anywhere, do anything. You could travel like we always dreamed about. You could buy your own land. Be completely independent. Magnolia set a cup of coffee in front of her sister. And what about you? I'll manage. The marriage to Frederick can be annulled easily enough. I'll take my share of the inheritance and figure things out. Together, Magnolia said firmly. Whatever we decide together. We're all the family each other has left. But it was Jasper who resolved the dilemma, appearing in the kitchen doorway dressed in his best suit, ready for their wedding. You're dressed for a ceremony, Magnolia observed, her heart lifting at the sight of him. So are you. He looked at both sisters with quiet determination. I've been thinking about this inheritance, about what it means for us. Jasper, if you're worried that I'm only marrying you because I have no other choice, I'm not worried about that anymore. He moved to stand beside her chair. I'm worried about something else entirely. What? I'm worried that you might marry me when you finally have the freedom to choose anything else in the world. I want to make sure you're choosing me because you want to, not because you feel you have to. Magnolia stood, facing him squarely. And if I choose you anyway, if I choose this life, this place, this future we can build together, then I guess we'd better get to church before the minister thinks we've changed our minds. As they prepared to leave for their wedding, the inheritance papers sat on the kitchen table, a reminder that their love had survived not just deception and doubt, but the ultimate test of having other choices. They were choosing each other freely, and that made all the difference in the world. The church was small but filled to capacity when they arrived. Word of the previous night's dramatic events had spread through town like wildfire, but rather than keeping people away, it seemed to have drawn them in. Everyone wanted to see how this remarkable story would end. Magnolia walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm. He had insisted on giving her away since her father couldn't be there. Violet sat in the front pew, still pale but smiling through her tears of joy and relief. At the altar, Jasper waited in his best black suit, his blue eyes never leaving Magnolia's face as she approached. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When they reached the part about speaking now or forever holding their peace, more than one person held their breath, wondering if another dramatic revelation was coming, but the church remained peaceful, except for the minister's steady voice. Do you, Jasper, William Thornfield, take Magnolia Ruth Hawthorne to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do. His voice was steady and certain, carrying clearly through the small church. And do you, Magnolia Ruth Hawthorne, take Jasper William Thornfield to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? Magnolia looked into Jasper's eyes, seeing her future reflected there. Not the future she had planned, or the one others had chosen for her, but the one she was choosing for herself. I do. The kiss that sealed their marriage was soft and sweet, full of promise for the years ahead. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife, Magnolia caught sight of the stained glass window behind the altar, a scene of weary travelers finally finding their way home. The reception was held in the church hall, with food contributed by various families and music provided by Old Pete's fiddle. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and welcoming. Exactly what Magnolia had never known she wanted. As the evening wore on, she found herself standing outside with Violet, watching the first stars appear in the clear sky. "Are you happy?" Violet asked softly. "I am. Truly happy for the first time in years. Are you going to be all right?" Violet was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I think so. It hurts, knowing that Frederick never really loved me. But maybe that's better than spending years in a marriage built on lies. What will you do now? With the inheritance, you could do anything." "I've been thinking about that." Violet smiled, and for the first time in days it reached her eyes. "I think what I really want is to come home." "Home?" "Here. Not to interfere with your new life, but to be close to family again. Maybe I could buy some land nearby, start fresh, learn to be useful instead of just ornamental." Magnolia felt tears prick her eyes. "I'd like that very much. And Thomas? He's a good man, Maggie. Maybe someday, when I've figured out who I am without a man defining me, maybe we could at least be friends. I think he'd like that too." They stood in comfortable silence. Two sisters who had found their way back to each other after years of misunderstanding and distance. Inside, Jasper was talking with the minister about the legal paperwork when Thomas approached, extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Congratulations," Thomas said. "I meant what I said about being happy for you both. I know you did. That means more than you know." Thomas hesitated, then added, "Take care of her, Jasper. She's stronger than she knows, but she's been carrying other people's burdens for so long, she sometimes forgets to take care of herself." "I will." "And Thomas? That inheritance money, don't let Magnolia use it as an excuse to take care of everyone else before herself. She's got a chance now to build something just for her." It was good advice, and over the following months, as lawyers sorted out the inheritance and Frederick faced justice for his crimes, Jasper made sure Magnolia remembered it. The money, when it finally came through, was indeed substantial enough to expand the ranch, buy better livestock, even build a larger house. But Magnolia seemed almost afraid of the wealth at first, as if having money made her somehow less deserving of happiness. "It's just money," Jasper told her one evening, as they sat on their porch, a porch that would soon be replaced by a larger one on their new house. "It doesn't change who you are or why I love you. Doesn't it? I came here with nothing, and you loved me anyway. Now I have more money than I ever dreamed of. How do you know which version of me you really fell in love with?" Jasper set down his coffee and pulled her chair closer to his. "I fell in love with the woman who held fence posts steady without being asked, who saved kitchen scraps for a stray dog, who hummed while she worked and made my house feel like a home for the first time in my life. And if I use this money to help Violet get settled, to send some to Thomas for improvements on his farm, to do good things with it, then I'll love you even more for having such a generous heart." As winter melted into spring, their new house began to take shape, not a mansion, but a comfortable home, with room for the family they hoped to have someday. Violet had indeed bought land nearby and was building her own small place, with Thomas's help and growing friendship. The three of them had become an unlikely family of sorts, bound together by shared history and genuine affection. David Morrison had tried to contact Magnolia once when news of the inheritance reached Ohio, but she had returned his letter unopened. Some bridges, once burned, were better left as ashes. One evening in late spring, as Magnolia tended her flower garden, she had finally been able to plant the flowers Violet had once dreamed of. Jasper came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Any regrets?" he asked, his chin resting comfortably on her shoulder. She leaned back against his solid warmth, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs now. "About which part?" "Coming here under false pretenses, lying to you about my sister, falling in love when I least expected it. Any of it. All of it. Magnolia turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his beloved face. In the distance, she could see Violet and Thomas working together in Violet's new garden, their friendship slowly blooming into something deeper and more honest than either had known before. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." And as he kissed her there among the flowers she had planted in soil they had worked together, Magnolia knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach, the ones you found by getting completely lost and then letting your heart lead you home. Their love story had begun with deception and desperation, but it had grown into something real and lasting through honesty, hard work and the courage to choose each other freely when they finally had other options. In the end, that made all the difference in the world. What an incredible journey from heartbreak to true love. Jasper and Magnolia's story proves that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst nightmares. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it did mine. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love connecting with amazing people from all around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to help us spread more stories of kindness, love and hope. Your support means everything and helps these beautiful stories reach others who need to hear them. And speaking of incredible stories, make sure to click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another amazing tale that will capture your heart. Thanks for listening, and remember, love always finds a way.